Hey Jay, I just had a question about sort of tag, because I feel like tag kind of undermines the science in general, and even as like an Orthodox Christian, at what point, what criteria are we saying oh, we can use science and use evidence? Because where does that align with Orthodoxy?
No, I would argue that in fact you couldn't have science without the transcendental categories. So it really has nothing to do with undermining science. Why would it undermine science? I mean, evidences are absolutely necessary. It just depends on what type of thing is being debated or what the question is. So, for example, if somebody came to the debate and said, "Oh, there's no historical evidence for the person called Jesus of Nazareth," right? A lot of atheists say this. Well, this is the perfect time to bring in historical evidences and say that is actually totally not true. Here's this evidence. Here's this evidence. Here's this evidence. Here's this evidence. So, in that case, it's absolutely necessary to bring in historians, testimonies, evidences, proofs, quotes. But if it's a debate about something that's prior to evidences like worldviews or paradigms, it's not going to work to just put forward evidences. You're going to have to deal with something at a paradigm level like transcendental categories, preconditions.
But when you debate a Catholic and you're saying that they're an evidentialist, but they're also not only an evidentialist, they also have faith. So where does that stand?
Well, fideism and evidentialism actually go together. So I'm not sure what you mean by they're evidentialists and they have faith. Evidentialism is a school of apologetics that believes that you just quote prove something by piling up a bunch of evidences, and if you get enough of those stacked up, maybe they'll choose in the right direction. But evidentialism relies on a certain type of epistemology, classical foundationalism usually, and it relies on other things that are not proven or demonstrable, like that everything is theory neutral. So evidentialism is an assumption in epistemology and in classical foundationalism that I'm calling into question. That doesn't really have anything to do with Catholics saying that they believe something, quote, on faith. In fact, that's kind of a fideistic move, typically, which actually makes sense with evidentialism.
Yeah, but my question arises with Orthodoxy when they put an emphasis on mystery and mysticism. How does that not contradict with evidence, and how can we use evidence?
Well, I mean, apologetics and this kind of stuff only goes so far. It's just a sign pointer. It's not the essence of the faith. The essence of the faith is you directly experiencing God in the mysteries, namely the Orthodox liturgy. So mysteries doesn't mean like some sort of Gnostic unknowable thing. In the Orthodox sense, the mysteries are the things that are revealed.
Revealed like divine revelation, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay, so, but not everyone is, for example, I had an atheist say, divine revelation, what about, when you see, evolution and you see the different evidence they give for evolution, at what point do we say, when we're looking at different evidences like that, where we see science, at what point do we say, okay, do we pick divine revelation or do we see this evidence?
Right. Well, that's what I'm getting at with paradigms, which is that there's no, quote, evidences that are self interpreting or that don't come with some kind of network of things to interpret it through. So there's no such thing as like a bunch of evidences that just necessarily prove evolution, because you're still interpreting the evidences. And in philosophy, for example, there's a problem called the underdetermination of data thesis. And what this is dealing with is the fact that you can have a bunch of evidences that can equally be explained by rival theories or paradigms. So just having a lot of evidences will not tell you which theory or which paradigm is correct, because both of them potentially can explain the same data. So that's why evidences just from the underdetermination of data thesis problem are not enough to sway you at a paradigm level question. And I would argue that maybe even evolutionary theory is actually a paradigm level I mean, I know that most evolutionary theory proponents think that they're just going with, quote, the data and the evidences and the science papers and the science men. But if you really dig into it, it's actually a grand narrative that goes way out of the scope of sense data. And it's a vast metaphysical religion in reality that is a paradigm level commitment, in my view.
Okay, that makes complete sense. But I guess my question or my struggle arises when you have scientific data that kind of rubs against the Bible, and at what point do we say, like, oh, science is wrong or the Bible is right?
Again, I think it just have to be a case by case basis. I mean, in my view, philosophy, this is where I would be out of accord with probably most people in modernity. In my view, information and theories and things that come from the scientific realm, I'm not opposed to them. It's just that in my paradigm, I'm way more skeptical about those things than I am about philosophy. And that's the reverse of most people. Most people in the modern world are way more, in my view, dubiously certain about scientific claims and theories, and they're way less certain and don't know anything about philosophy. So I have a totally different inverted paradigm from the way most people think. So when I hear supposed accounts of, oh, this paper has come out and it supposedly refutes this, blah, 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 and I'm just like, I really don't put a whole lot of stock in science papers, because I just remind people that the most important science journal in the world in terms of medicine, The Lancet, about 6 or 7 years ago, said half of the science papers in the world are fraudulent. So if that's true, and if I'm supposed to believe the authorities of the peer-reviewed domain, and the peer-reviewed domain authorities tell me that half the science papers in the world are fraudulent, then how am I supposed to believe the peer-reviewed papers that tell me blah, 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 blah? You see, it's a crisis of science papers, and literally that's what the Lancet says. It's a crisis of science papers. So I hold them all in speculative. They're all in the speculative bin for me.